Today we're going to go over the lesson for 3-8, slopes of parallel and perpendicular lines. So let's fill in the blanks of some definitions. So when you have parallel lines, what the main thing you need to know is when you have the slopes, they're going to be exactly the same. Now, if you understand that, the next two lines might be confusing. Just go ahead and fill them in. They're saying as long as the lines aren't vertical and they're the same, then they have the same slope. So vertical is when they go up and down when it's an undefined slope. Again, if we're getting technical and kind of wordy here, just know if the slopes are the same, they're parallel. And you know parallel means they never intersect. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump right into a problem, how to take an equation that's already given to you and to take a point that is a new point, and you're going to write the equation that will go directly through that point that will be parallel to the line that they just gave you. Now, of course, the answer is right here, but how do you get to it? And let me explain. Now, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to look at the equation that they give you and you're going to pull out the slope. It's the only information you need. The information is -5 is the slope. So notice over here in red, I wrote down my slope is -5. I don't care what the intercept used to be. So guys, you're done with this information. You can cross it off. Don't let it confuse you. So you know with this new line that you're going to write, the slope is going to be at -5. So notice in my final answer, I put my slope is at -5. But here's the thing, it will have a new intercept. So you have to do some work to find the intercept. So I'm using y equals mx plus b, and I'm going to take the x and y and m, and I'm going to plug it in to this equation and just solve for b, which is my y-intercept. So my y value, again, I look up here at the coordinate, it is -2. I already know that my slope is -5. My x value, again, I look back up at the top, it is a +5. And then I'm solving for b, so it's plus b. So I multiply. What's -5 and +5? Well, that's -25. And I move it to the other side, and I add it. So a -2 and a +25 is a +23. So I take this number and I plug it in place of a b, and I have my new equation. So this equation goes through point C, the point that they gave you in the problem, this point right up here, and it is parallel to this beginning line that they gave us, and we're finished. Now the next one, as you notice, is blank. So we're going to have to do this together. So what do you need out of this equation? There's only one thing. You need this slope. So I'm going to write down my slope is a -1/4. Then I'm finished with it. Now I'm going to label x and y. Now what equation do I use? I use y equals mx plus b. So my y value, I look back at the coordinates, it is 3. My m is a -1/4, and my x is a 4. So I'm going to multiply. I know that -1/4 times 4 equals -1. If you happen to not know that, you could grab a calculator and easily figure that out. Now, let's solve for b. I'm going to add 1 over and get that b is 4. Now, you're almost finished. This is my original equation, y equals mx plus b. So I'm going to just take out my m and my b, and I accidentally erased too much. There. And I'm going to plug in the information I just found. My m is a -1/4, And my new intercept is 4. So that's the final answer. That's your new equation. So on part C, it's saying that x is 3. Well, that doesn't really look like y equals mx plus b at all. So what does it look like? Well, it looks like x-axis, go over to 3, and you draw a line straight through that point. Okay, so it wants a line parallel to this line, but it needs to go through this new point. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it has to be parallel, so it's going to go up and down like that. So the blue line, that's the line I need the new equation from. What is this equation? Well, that's pretty easy because you're to say what axis does it intersect? It crosses the x-axis. And where does it cross the x-axis? It crosses at -3. So anytime you need something that is parallel to a line that is undefined, all you have to do is look up here and say, oh, I need the x value, -3. And you're finished. It looks like a difficult problem, but it ends up being one of the problems that requires the least amount of work. Now, the next part, we have a bunch of blanks. Let's fill them in. Perpendicular lines. Now, first of all, there is a symbol for perpendicular. It looks like a big upside down capital T. And the word perpendicular is a pretty long word. So if you want to use the new symbol, you're free to do that. If two lines are perpendicular, then their slopes are opposite reciprocals. Now, opposite reciprocals, what's that? Okay, so if I have 2/3, if I make it opposite, if this one's positive, the opposite would be negative. And a reciprocal is when you flip it. So that would be 3/2. Let's try another. What if I have a slope of -6? Now, what's the opposite? Opposite of negative is positive, and 6 is really over 1, so when I flip it, I get 1/6. So now we can do a tricky one. If you have a 0 slope, what's perpendicular to it? So that's horizontal. Vertical would be perpendicular to it, and that's undefined. That's a tricky one. And let's do one more for good measure. Um, a -2/9. So the opposite reciprocal would be positive 9/2. All right, so here's some more ways to write the same information. If two lines have opposite reciprocal slopes, then the lines are perpendicular, and you can use the symbol if you didn't want to write the word out. And lastly, any horizontal and vertical lines are perpendicular. And we just talked about that right here with the 0 and undefined slope. So we are going to start very similar to the questions we had up above. I give you a new equation. I give you a new point. But this time, the equation needs to be perpendicular. So what's the slope of the line that they gave you? It's right there. It's -3. So once I get the information, I cross it off. What's the perpendicular slope? Let's take it from negative to positive and flip it. So now it is 1/3. Now I'm going to circle it and maybe even cross that off. I've seen too many kids miss it because they look up and use the wrong information. So the 6 is my x, the 2 is my y. I use the same equation, y equals mx plus b. And let's start plugging in. Y is 2. My slope is 1/3. X is 6. And then plus b. So I need to multiply this out. What's 1/3 times 6? That is a 2. Now, if I subtract the 2 over, you notice that 2 minus 2 is 0. So my y-intercept is at 0. Okay, so I know it's a little bit weird, but you know what? Intercepts can be at 0, 0. Now, let's take out the m, let's take out the b, and let's just plug in our new information. What's the new slope? It was -3, but now it is a positive 1/3, and my intercept is at 0. So, do we have anyone out there that says, why are you putting the 0? Do I have to put the 0? And the answer is no, you don't have to put the 0. So if I wanted to write it y equals 1/3 x, that would be fine, and you could be finished. They would both be considered correct. On the next one, what is the current slope? Well, the current slope is this right here. It's 5. So what's the opposite reciprocal? Well, opposite, it would be negative, and I flip it, would be 1/5. Okay, so notice I crossed off the information I'm not going to use. I circled the one I will use, and I get x and y values. So again, I always go back to y equals mx plus b. So 2 equals 1/5 times 2 plus b. So again, I'm just plugging in my 3 numbers that are provided. So this math doesn't come out to a nice whole number, I should say. So I get a -2/5 plus b. So I'm going to add 2/5 to the other side, which is not really that hard to add together. 2 plus 2/5 is 2 and 2/5. Okay, so how do you finish it? I take my original equation, I take out the m, I take out the b. My new slope is a -1/5. Make sure you can see that negative. And my new intercept is at 2 and 2/5. So we're finished. Okay, so, every time they have to give you a tricky one at the end. So if you look back up at this one, this was x equals -3. Now this one looks different, but it's just y equals 4. So what's happening? So if you sketch this out, x and y, on the y-axis you're going up to 4. At 4, it's perpendicular to the axis. So it's horizontal. It's a horizontal line. So what's perpendicular to a horizontal line? It would be a line that goes straight up and down. So the current slope is a 0, and the perpendicular slope would be undefined. Now, the point that they give us is at -3, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's supposed to be perpendicular. So, that's the line we need to graph. Okay, got it. So, what is the equation of that line? And sometimes, honestly, graphing it out is easier. If you're a visual learner, you can visually see it's crossing this x-axis at -3. Or if you understand when it's 0 slope, y, and you just took the y value, and then you're going to do the opposite for when it's perpendicular. And so you just look up here and say, oh, I'm going to use the x. So x is -3. But I really think graphing the picture out makes it easier to understand. Okay, so what the next part is asking you to do is to count out the slope and then compare them. So I've already counted out the slopes for you for time's sake. And as you can see, the they were both 2/6, which reduces to 1/3. Since they are identical, that means that they are parallel. And it says explain. So by explaining, you're telling me the slope, and then you're going to interpret the slope. So they are both the same, and then I'm writing they're parallel because they have the same slope. So how did I count this out? From this lowest point, I drew a line, I made it lined up for rise, and then I did my run to the right, and I counted it out. Now, when you run to the right, it's always positive. So this is a positive 1/3 and a positive 1/6. Now, on the next one, now you can't just guess, you have to like back it up with numbers. So this one, I think I had previously erased it. I just went up and over and I counted up 1, 2, 3, over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 3/6, it's positive, reduces to 1/2. So on the other line, I start at the bottom point and I go up and then to the left. I counted up 8/4, 8, and it is negative, and I reduce it to get -2. So when you have half and a -2 together, that is perpendicular because they are opposite reciprocals. Okay, now for this next part, I'm trying to save time having me do algebra, but I will explain the algebra. What you're doing is you're solving for y because everything honestly goes back to y equals mx plus b. That's what everything is based off of. So you're going to solve for y. Now, how do you solve for y? First, you subtract x, which I did here, and I crossed it off. And then I divided by 6. Now, my slope is this here in yellow that I have highlighted. And I put the 1 next to the x so you can see that my slope is really a -1/6. Now for the second equation, I'm solving for y again. So I had to add x to both sides. And then I had to divide by -5 all the way across. So over here, I have the slope highlighted. It was x over -5, but I clearly know there's a 1 in front of the x. So it's 1 over -5. So you're comparing your two slopes. They're not the same at all. So if they're not the same, that just means they're neither parallel or perpendicular. So the answer is neither. And the reason is because they're just different slopes. Now, part B is a pretty nice question because you don't have to solve. And it's usually tricky because I usually can fool someone. But one of them, I mean, if you look at them, they are highlighted there. They are reciprocals of each other, but they are not opposites, which means one needs to be negative. So since one of them, or since both are positive, the answer is neither. And, if one of them was negative, it would work. So I just wrote one needs to be negative for them to be, perpendicular. Okay, moving on. I'm solving for y. So I'm going to subtract, right here, subtract my -1/2x, 1/2 x, and then I divide by 2. And when I do that, I get my new equation. Now, 1/2 divided by 2, so you're saying, what's half divided by 2? So what's half of a half? So that is a -1/4. On the second equation, I first subtract 2x, and then I divide by 8 all the way across, and I get a -1/4 for my slope. Now, as you can see, they're both identical. The intercepts are different. That's totally fine that the intercepts are different. You're comparing slopes. So the answer is same slope, which means they are parallel, not perpendicular. Okay, so on the last one, And I'll redraw this out. They always like the parallel perpendicular ones. Okay, so here's just my X and Y axis. On the Y axis, let's go to -1. And my line would be perpendicular to that axis. Ooh, back up. I was going too fast. On the x-axis, it says 0. There's 0. So it should be here. On the y-axis, let's change colors. It's going to be at -1. So on the y-axis, I go down to -1, and it's perpendicular through that axis. Okay, so as you can see, one's vertical, one's horizontal. They are perpendicular. If you want to use this new symbol, you could. And the reason is because they are opposite reciprocals. Okay, last one. So I already graphed the 3 points. If you haven't already, graph the 3 points on your paper. And it says, verify that the triangle is a right triangle. Okay, so if this was a right triangle, I'm going to assume that would be the right angle. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the slope of line AB, and then we're going to find the slope of line CB, and hopefully those are opposite reciprocals. So let's find the slope of line AB. So I'm going to go up and over. I'm going to go up 2 and over 3. 2, 3. And it is positive because I'm running to the right. Now, if I'm going from B to C, I'm going up and then to the left. Now, first thing I notice is I'm running to the left. It's going to be negative. Now, let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, I got -6. And then over 1, 2, 3, 4, which reduces to a -3/2. So, are they parallel? No, they're not the same. Are they perpendicular? Yes, they're perpendicular because they're opposite reciprocals. And if they're perpendicular, it means they form a right angle. Okay, it says graph the triangle, which we did. Explain your reasoning. So your reasoning should be, I'm not going to write it out, I'll let you write it out, is that since they're perpendicular, they form a right angle. Therefore, you know it has to be a right triangle. So, this is all there is for this lesson. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks a lot. Bye.